Chapter 251. Many years went by, and the woman died of illness, leaving only such a company behind. The man took care of the daughter and worked hard to manage the company while his relatives never lent him a helping hand or even shared his hardships. Maisie lowered his eyes and scoffed. After many years, after the girl grew up, the man wanted to hand the company to the girl, but the man's mother brought her relative to their house and demanded the man to hand the company that the girl's mother worked so hard to establish to her relative's son. All that just because the mother and the relative think that a daughter of the family doesn't have the right to inherit the family's company. Of course, Madame Vanderbilt knew that the story Maisie was talking about was clearly an evasive reprimand. And her expression turned gloomy at that moment. The reporters in the audience obviously understood the underlying meaning of the story and felt that the relatives were indeed too mean. All children should have the right to inherit a family's property. And one shouldn't be deprived of the right to get what she deserves just because she's born a girl. What era are we living in now? This family actually still upholds such a conservative ideology that favors boys over girls? Not to mention, they still plan to hand the company to a collateral relative. Maisie Vanderbilt. Don't make up stories to fool the media. You'd better explain clearly how you murdered your aunt. Madame Vanderbilt's voice was not loud, but all the reporters present heard it. A reporter then asked, "Can I ask you about the murder of your aunt, Yanis Warren? According to the information we got, you had a conflict with your relatives because of Vena Jewelry's inheritance and you've thought about retaliation. Could it be that you've accidentally killed your aunt because of an act of vengeance?" Nolan was standing behind the curtains, and his eyes turned cold. If it weren't for Maisie's insistence on not allowing him to appear before the crowd, he would have rushed onto the stage and shown those bastards a living hell on earth. Maisie looked at the reporter. "Is there any evidence that points toward the fact that I've killed her?" As soon as Maisie said that, the reporters in the audience nodded and whispered something among themselves. However, Madame Vanderbilt, who was sitting in the front row, snorted. "You had something on Yanis and used it to lure her out to harm her." Maisie smiled. "I was in black gold all the time on the day my aunt was killed. So, how did I accomplish what you said when I was physically in the black gold?" "You. Then you must have hired assassins to kill her." Madame Vanderbilt insisted that Maisie was the one who did it. Especially after hearing Layla's words. "You could bribe a lawyer into helping you to get your hands on Vena Jewelry, so why couldn't you hire someone to kill your aunt?" There was an uproar at the scene. Layla's eyes looked cold and merciless. "Just you wait, Maisie. You'll definitely be forced onto a path of no return today." Nolan took a deep breath as he looked at Maisie, who remained silent for a moment on the stage. He could not help but frown. She must be at a loss, right? He could no longer sit back and watch. Quincy held him back just as he was about to go out, and he saw the door being pushed open slowly. 2 police officers then walked in from the outside with the forensic expert, Dr. Watson. The reporters were all flustered. Even the police have arrived at the scene. Could it be that they've established the fact that Ms. Vanderbilt is the murderer? When Madame Vanderbilt saw the police entering the hall, she stood up and exclaimed excitedly, "It's nice to see you, officers. The murderer is on the stage. Hurry up and arrest her." Stephen got up from his seat. "Mother, stop." The police walked past them, approached Layla, and took out a warrant. "Miss Scott, you're suspected of committing a murder. Please come with us." The pride on Layla's face gradually turned into consternation. And a death-like pallor covered the change in expression. Officer, you're joking, right? How could I have murdered someone? The killer is on the stage." Chapter 252. "Yeah, officer, how would my mother kill someone? Have you made a mistake?" Willow had no idea what was going on. The police didn't make any mistakes. Maisie's gaze landed on the Vanderbilts, and she explained slowly, "Doctor, Watson has tested the DNA of the epithelial cells left in Aunt Yanis' fingernails, which belonged to the murderer. The DNA is the same as that of Layla Scott's. Layla's face paled instantly. Fingernails. Could it be that Yanis scratched my scalp when she was grabbing me by my hair? Joe nodded with a smile, took the DNA verification results out of a folder, and handed it to the Vanderbilts. Stephen took the report, skimmed through its content, turned around, and glared at Layla. So it was you. No, it's not me. I didn't kill anyone, it wasn't me. Besides, why would I kill Yanis? I have no reason to kill her. Layla explained nervously. You certainly don't have a reason to kill her. Maisie slowly walked off the stage. But if Aunt Yanis found out that you and Uncle Yorick were cheating on her behind her back and she confronted you, you may have a reason to do so already. Layla staggered backward. Even Yorick was caught off guard. Layla suddenly burst out laughing as if she had lost her mind and glared at Maisie viciously. It really is you, *TCH. Layla rushed forward and was about to assault Maisie, but the two police officers and the security guard at the scene rushed over and subdued her. Maisie stood in front of Layla and stared at her condescendingly. You should just have behaved yourself if you didn't want people to discover anything. Aside from that, why would I want to harm you? It's you, Layla Scott. You did those things to my father behind his back. And you even tried to kill me over and over again. You've always pretended to be innocent, but you're the most malicious person in this room. Madame Vanderbilt slumped on the chair. Layla turns out to be. Layla killed Yanis? How could this be? After Linda learned of this fact, she stepped forward and slapped Willow. It turns out that the homewrecker mother of yours was the person who did it. Stephen stopped her. Lynn, stop it. He then turned his head and stared at Maisie. Z, what do you mean by what you said just now? Layla and her brother-in-law? Cold sweat rolled down from Yorick's forehead, and he did not dare to look directly at Stephen for a moment. Everything immediately made sense to Stephen when he saw Yorick's reaction. Nice one, Layla Scott. One is my elder brother and the other one is my cheating wife. Stephen laughed out of wrath. Although he no longer had any feelings for Layla because of what Layla had done before, she still got together with his elder brother before they were officially divorced. Layla giggled in embarrassment. It's all your fault. It's you who treated us mother and daughter like shit first, so what if I made you a cuckold? Stephen's body was trembling vigorously. He was that close to hitting her. Layla no longer cared about anything. You're the dumb one here. You're the one who couldn't resist my temptation and gave up on your marriage with Marina back then. You're the one who cheated in the first place. Ha ha ha. Yes, my father is dumb and blind. Or else he wouldn't have treated both of you mother and daughter so well over the years. He also wouldn't have raised a kid for another man for more than 20 years. Layla's smile gradually disappeared as she stared at Maisie blankly. This time around, everyone in the audience was shocked. Even Stephen's expression turned stiff and cold. Maisie took out an envelope and threw it in front of Layla. There was also a paternity test between Willow and Stephen. You take a good look at these. They'll show you how you got pregnant in the first place and how you brought the child to the Vanderbilt Manor to deceive my father. Chapter 253. Stephen picked up the envelope on the floor, which contained dozens of extremely filthy photos, each of which had a familiar face. The paternity test confirmed that Stephen and Willow were not related by blood. Willow sat slumped on the floor. I'm not Stephen's daughter, Maisie said expressionlessly. Miss Scott used to live in the underground freeway. She worked in a very specialized field and went through many guests every day. As for how she got pregnant and who's the biological father of the child, I would bet that she doesn't have a clue. No, the child belongs to Steph. Steph, you have to believe me. You bitch. Stephen threw the photos on her face and rebuked furiously, "How dare you lie to me for so many years?" Layla was in despair. She thought of something all of a sudden and looked at Willow. "Willie, listen to me, I can explain." "Don't say my name, you disgusting woman. Why did you give birth to me? Why? I hate you. And Maisie Vanderbilt, I hate you too." Willow shrieked hysterically, turned around, and ran out. Layla's pupils constricted as she could see Willow's disgust and hatred for herself in her eyes. The police no longer gave Layla any chance to explain and brought her away. The truth behind the matter had become clear to everyone. And all the media outlets left after witnessing the ridiculous farce. Madame Vanderbilt smacked and scolded Yorick at the scene. Linda was still startled by the fact that her father had cheated on her mother with Layla. Maisie's eyelids drooped when she saw her father's depressed expression. "I'm sorry, Dad." Stephen swallowed all the grief and forced out a smile. "I don't blame you. At least, I get to see her true colors now." Maisie's eyes turned bloodshot while looking at the lonely figure of her father as he left the scene, and all the complaints that she had against him in the past disappeared. One Maisie turned around and saw Nolan walking toward her. She was about to say something when Nolan stretched out his arm and took her into his arms. Maisie, who was in Nolan's arms, was stunned. The man's broad shoulders were strong and warm. "I was backstage worrying about you all this while." Nolan placed his palm on the back of her head and shoved her head against his arms. He almost rushed out to the front several times, fearing that all the questions and suspicions would swamp this woman. Maisie's eyelashes drooped. She once thought that no one would worry about her like that except for her children. However, it seemed that she was no longer alone now. The corners of her lips were raised as she gave off a smile. She then looked at him. "Nolan, I realized that you're quite adorable sometimes. Especially when he's not being the bag that he usually is." Nolan frowned. This woman actually describes me using the word adorable? Does she think that I'm not macho enough? Nolan tilted his head, loosened his tie, and suddenly picked her up. Maisie subconsciously wrapped her arms around his neck, stunned. "What are you doing?" "I think it's necessary for me to prove to you again whether I'm macho enough." Nolan picked her up and left the scene in huge strides. The man tossed the woman around in the bedroom all night just because he misunderstood the meaning of a word that she used during the day. Nolan looked at the woman who was soundly asleep due to the lethargy, smiled helplessly, leaned over, and kissed her on the forehead. He then got up, put on his clothes, picked up the phone, and left the room. In the study, Nolan was on the phone with someone. "Sir, the prison guard said that Layla won't plead guilty and insists on pushing the blame on Ms. Vanderbilt. She's also very unstable emotionally and refuses to cooperate." Nolan's expression was cold after he heard this. "Then arrange for someone to take good care of her inside the prison." "Then what about the other Ms. Vanderbilt?" "As for Willow, just send her to where she should head to." Nolan showed no mercy. Chapter 254. I'll never show the people who have hurt my woman any mercy. At the black market. I beg you. Please let me go. You can make me do whatever you want. Just let me go. Willow cried and knelt at Gerald's feet and begged. Gerald was smoking a pipe. And he tooted when he looked at the poor woman kneeling in front of him. If you want to blame it on someone or something, blame it on the fact that you're the daughter of that SL*T. Layla still owes us a debt. Since you're her daughter, it's obligatory for you to repay your mother's debts. Blood was drained from Willow's face gradually. She hated her mother ever since she learned that her father was not Stephen and that she was a product of her mother's choice to screw around with various men. And now that her mother had been caught, she was the one to have to suffer because she was her mother's daughter. Why can't I have Maisie's identity? No, I can't stay in the black market. I can't be like mother. How much does my mother owe you? I can pay it back. Find Nolan Goldman. Yes, you should know him, he'll definitely help me. I stayed by Nolan's side for 6 years. Nolan will sympathize with what I've experienced and help me. Gerald scoffed when he heard her mentioning Mr. Goldman's name. Are you saying that Mr. Goldman will help you? Willow nodded vigorously. Gerald raised his foot and kicked her to the ground. Have you woken up from your dream? Mr. Goldman will help you? He laughed and added, Mr. Goldman has indeed helped you. He's helped you by sending you here to make money for us. No, that's impossible. Willow refused to believe it. Nolan wouldn't treat me like that. It must be Maisie. She must have asked Nolan to do this. Believe it or not, you'll stay here and pick up guests from today onward. If you dare to resist or run away, I'll break your limb and make you YSH that you were dead. Willow slumped on the ground, feeling that she had fallen into darkness. My life has been ruined, and it's all Maisie's fault. I hate her, I hate her. The next day, after the media outlets reported about the plot twist in Maisie's murder accusation, everyone sympathized with Maisie's experience and condemned the ambition that Madame Vanderbilt's family possessed and the cruelty of Maisie's stepmother. Of course, the media outlets did not mention a word about Layla's scandal over Stephen. Maisie put down the newspaper and looked at Nolan sitting opposite her. Thank you for not allowing the media to expose the affair between my father and Layla. Who else would have the power to do so apart from Nolan? She had been forced by Layla to expose everything about Layla. She also knew that it would definitely hurt her father's reputation to a certain extent once she exposed everything about her. That was why she had not told her father about what she had on Layla. She would not even have done this if Layla had not killed Yanis and pushed the blame onto herself. Nolan raised his eyebrows slightly. If you really want to thank me, why don't we get married? Maisie was astonished. Get married? Will this be too soon? Maisie was a little overwhelmed. Although she did not hate Nolan so much now, she had not thought about marrying him. Seeing that she was still hesitating, Nolan frowned slightly. Our children are already so big. Can't I give you an official title? Maisie wanted to say something when a deep voice sounded. I haven't agreed to that. Rowena and Titus had just come back from outside, and they probably heard what Nolan said to Maisie. Thus, Titus snorted and said, Your woman has yet to pass my test. And you've already made up your mind to marry her. I won't allow that. Chapter 255. Rowena had also heard just now that Nolan actually wanted to marry that woman. She bit her lip lightly and hid the gloom and coldness in her eyes away. Nolan's expression looked extremely displeased as he was interrupted. I don't need your consent for who I'm going to marry. Brat, are you going against me deliberately? Titus reprimanded angrily, since she has agreed to my conditions, I'll never agree to your marriage before she gets my approval. Nolan got up and smiled at the old man. Then do you mean that you'll agree to it as long as Z completes the tasks in the army and achieves some results? Titus was stunned for a split second. He felt that his grandson had found a loophole in their conversation and had set him up. However, he could not go back on his own word. Then we'll have to see if she can pass all the tests and achieve good results within half a month. Do you think it's feasible? People who haven't received any professional training would be considered newcomers who have just received training after surviving for half a month in the army. So what achievements can she obtain? Nolan's face dimmed slightly. Rowena walked to the old man's side. Grandpa, this is really too difficult for Ms. Vanderbilt. Let's just forget about the bet. Seeing that she was speaking for Maisie, who knew that Rowena was just giving Maisie a chance to step down. She wouldn't be so embarrassed if she were to give up voluntarily. As a delicate woman, it's estimated that she would undergo a mental breakdown and want to return home in less than a week if she were to join the army for half a month. Grandpa is clearly giving her the task just to force her to back off. So why would she bring the troubles upon herself? Nolan turned to look at Maisie. Z, the bet won't count. It's fine even if you don't want to go. So what if she were to break her promise? There's no way that I'm letting my woman suffer in the army. Even if she breaks her promise or her grandfather disapproves of our marriage, I'll still marry her. No one can stop me. Maisie originally thought Nolan would have some faith in herself, but his words clearly meant that he did not believe she could do it. No, I'm going. The more you think I can't do it, then the more I want to prove to you that I can do it. Maisie finished drinking the soy milk in the glass and got up. I'm heading to the company already. She picked up her bag and left. Nolan looked at Maisie's silhouette as she left the house. His thin lips tightly pursed. Titus was a little satisfied with Maisie's reaction. It seems that she is quite a tough young lady, not bad. Rowena saw the old man's expression. It was obvious that he had become more satisfied with her, and a hint of coldness flashed across her eyes. At Soul Jewelry Studio. You want to leave for half a month? Kennedy was a little surprised when he saw Maisie handing over all the work to him for the next 2 weeks. Well, I'm going to join the army for some training for half a month. So I can only leave everything to you for the next 2 weeks, Maisie replied. Thinking of something, she asked, is the batch of jewelry that Mr. Boucher ordered ready? Kennedy paused and nodded. It's all ready and can be delivered to the crew today. Okay. Then I'll rely on you to follow up on the post-sale service. Maisie smiled. After Kennedy went out, Maisie sat at her desk and looked at the computer's monitor. She was a little irritable when she thought about how Nolan did not believe in her ability earlier this morning. She suddenly thought of something, opened the drawer, and checked a business card that belonged to someone she had never contacted. She frowned. Forget it. I'll talk to Mrs. Lucas when I come back in half a month. Maisie's cell phone rang. It was Uncle Erwin. Administrative office. Nolan, you know that Grandpa is trying to make things hard for Ms. Vanderbilt, but are you really going to leave it alone? Rowena raised her gaze carefully and looked at the man who was reading documents. Chapter 256. That seemed to be a test. Nolan's eyes twitched, but he calmly said she would have her reasons to go. Maybe. I should have trusted her. Nolan reflected. He shouldn't have thought of Maisie as a weak person. He knew that she wasn't someone who would surrender. She would do whatever she wanted to. Nolan didn't know if she was angry and wasn't sure how to change that. Something came to his mind, so he looked up at Rowena. All you women have the same taste, right? Rowena paused with a smile on her face. That depends. Why? Z has probably been angry at me for a while already. I was thinking of getting her a present. Nolan was fully focused on getting back into Maisie's good books and didn't notice the change in Rowena's eyes. She bit her lip, and a hint of coldness flashed in her eyes. She dug her nails into her palms, but smiled and said, Isn't Ms. Vanderbilt a jewelry designer? She would probably be interested in jewelry. Nolan remembered something, got up, and said, You reminded me that there's an auction at the Jade store. There's probably something there that she would like. He took his coat and left, but Rowena immediately said, Nolan, do you want me to go with you? I can help you pick. Us women have pretty much the same taste. Nolan slightly raised his brows, but didn't have any reason to reject her. So he agreed. All right. Rowena looked down and smiled. Anything was nice as long as she could be by his side. One Maisie and Erwin sat at the cafe on top of Antique Street. Antique Street was aptly named because all the shops were old buildings. And antiques made out of jade were sold there. That was the biggest antiquity trade area in Bassburg. They were strict, and no exchanges were allowed after the deal. Even if tourists were conned, they had to bear the shame. What brings you here? Uncle Erwin? Maisie put her head on her hand, smiling. I saw the news about you, Vanderbilts, a few days ago. I just wanted to see how you've been. Would I be able to have tea with you if something happened to me? Maisie picked up the teacup and smiled. Erwin adjusted his glasses with vintage gold frames. I heard that you've rejected Larissa? Maisie paused and sighed, looking down. I can keep nothing from you. Haha, I thought you would want to go back to the de Armas after finding out about your mother's identity. He smiled. Maisie looked out of the window and calmly said, Uncle Erwin, why, did my mom leave the de Armas? She didn't understand why her mother would discard her identity as a de Arma and had come all the way to Zlokova from Stasilso, even changing her name. When someone changed their name, it was because they didn't want people to find out about their identity. Erwin's eyes darkened, but he said after a short while, because she was sick. Maisie was stunned. You mean that my mom really had cancer? She had gotten the news of her mother's passing through her father. And it was due to cancer. I'll talk to you about this later. You keep saying later. You've said that too many times, and I just feel that you're hiding something. Maisie looked Erwin in the eyes. She didn't think that the reason her mother had left her family was simple. Chapter 257. Erwin smiled helplessly. Didn't I say that I would tell you when you have enough power? There would be no benefit of me telling you this now, especially because of her relationship with the Goldmans. Especially because of what? Maisie asked. Erwin put down his teacup. There's a jade auction at the jade store. Do you want to go take a look? Knowing that Erwin was trying to change the topic, Maisie pursed her lips but stopped asking. In the jade store's immaculately designed hall, items made of jade were displayed on shelves. But the ones that were seen were mostly common jades like green jades and jasper. The top-quality white jades and jadites were in cupboards that the public could not get to. The jade store was filled with people who were there for the jade trade. The difference between the auctions of the jade store and other jewelry stores was that the jade store only auctioned jades. Erwin brought Maisie to a seat, but she saw a familiar silhouette sitting in another seat when she turned around. Nolan? What was he? Maisie then saw the woman sitting next to him. It was Rowena. Rowena leaned into Nolan to say something, but Nolan kept his eyes on the stage and nodded every once in a while. When her eyes caught Rowena's that were smiling, Maisie turned around, sat at her seat, and hugged herself tighter with her crossed arms. Maisie's focus wasn't on the stage until the auction began. Why was Nolan at the jade store with Rowena? Were they? She knew that Rowena was Titus' top choice. If it weren't for her and the kids, Nolan would probably be with Rowena. Why was she feeling uncomfortable? The item being auctioned off on stage was a delicate white jade ring for women. The transparency of the ring was amplified on the screen. Maisie pursed her lips while listening to the bids coming off stage until Nolan's voice appeared. She was stunned. He had the highest offer to get the ring for women. Was it for Rowena? Erwin turned to take a look, saw something, and raised his eyebrows. He turned around and looked at Maisie, who sat quietly next to him. You're angry? Erwin's words brought her back. She bit her lip. Why would I be angry? He smiled. If you didn't care, you wouldn't be upset. Maisie frowned. Why would she care about Nolan? Nolan didn't notice, but Rowena noticed Maisie's presence. She didn't inform Nolan. She didn't want Nolan to know that Maisie was there. But seeing how she looked, Maisie had probably misread the situation. Haha, great. Are you leaving already? Erwin left the jade store with her. He knew why she left. She never noticed that Nolan had a hold on her. Yes, there's something to be done at the office. Maisie smiled. The truth was, she didn't want to stay. Erwin didn't call her out. I'll send you back. Maisie didn't reject it. Maisie didn't return to the Goldman mansion that night but went to Vanderbilt Manor instead. When Stephen found out that Maisie was going to spend the night at home, he was really glad, but something came to his mind. Does Mr. Goldman know that you're staying here? Chapter 258. Maisie's expression changed when Nolan was mentioned, but she smiled to avoid making Stephen worry and said, I told the kids. Stephen nodded. Dad, why don't you hire a housekeeper? If we had a housekeeper, you could have more rest. Maisie changed the subject. Stephen waved his hand around. I'm getting used to having a lot of time on my hands. It's nice to do something since I have the time. Maisie looked down, but something came to her mind. Why don't I let the children come and spend time with you? You've never seen them. Stephen paused, but smiled. Yes, I haven't met them. Would the children hate me? No. Even though they're young, they're smart. She wouldn't have thought of letting the kids visit the Vanderbilt Manor in the past, but things were different now. The doorbell rang. Stephen got up to get the door, but was stunned when he saw who was at the door. Mr. Goldman? Maisie's face dropped when she saw Nolan. He got here quickly. Wasn't he happily at the Jade store with Rowena just now? Stephen brought him in and was going to say something to Maisie when he saw her put down her spoon and fork and go upstairs. Nolan frowned. Was this woman really angry? Did something happen between you and Z? Stephen asked. Was there a conflict? Nolan smiled. No, I'll go and see her. Stephen nodded, not getting in his way. He would let them settle if it was just a minor disagreement. When Nolan got to Maisie's room, he saw her folding her blanket. His lips curled. And he walked to her and hugged her from behind. Are you really angry? Let go. Maisie gnashed her teeth. I won't unless you tell me why you're angry. Did I do something, or was it about the agreement this morning? Nolan, who never questioned much, asked all kinds of questions to avoid being wrongly accused. Maisie took a deep breath, pulled his hand away, turned around, and said, Ask yourself. Why ask me? Nolan looked at her, not interested in an argument. He didn't even care about who was right. I'm sorry. It's not that I don't believe in you. I just didn't want you to suffer in a place like that. Maisie wanted to say something, but swallowed it. She was angry, but was that considered an apology? And he thought it was about that morning? Z, please forgive me. All right? Nolan coaxed. The innocent look on his absolutely handsome face, matched with his sincerity, shot right into her heart. Maisie didn't have the heart to scold him no matter how angry she was. If his attitude were hard like it was before, she probably wouldn't have felt that she was wrong. However, she now felt as though she would be wrong to be angry about something that didn't matter. Why did you come? Maisie crossed her arms and looked away. She couldn't understand why she would cave for this cheater. Aren't you going to join the troops? I want to spend the night with you. Maisie put her finger to his lips before he could finish and looked at him. Shouldn't you let me rest while knowing that I'm going to join the troops training tomorrow? She didn't want to go for the training while feeling sore all over. Nolan held on to her delicate hand and kissed the back of it. All right, I promise that you'll rest well tonight. Chapter 259. If that's the case, you should go back tonight. Maisie pulled her hand away with an insincere smile and pushed him out the door. The door closed and locked. Maisie stood behind the door. The scene of him and Rowena at the Jade store kept popping up in her mind. But he wasn't sorry about it. How could he pretend to be innocent? Why did this bother her so much? She shouldn't care. There was no movement on the other side of the door. She turned around and wondered if he had left. She had pushed him out. He would have left if he was smart. But what if he wouldn't leave? Maisie bit her lip and opened the door against her mind's will. Nolan was still standing outside the door, looking at her as though he was hurt. No. Maisie pulled at his collar, dragged him into the room, closed the door, pushed him against the wall, and started kissing him. If men did this to assert dominance, why did women do it? Nolan lowered his eyes and looked at that angry yet beautiful face. His eyes shone, and he raised his hand to hold her head, taking charge. He hugged her while taking a few steps to the bed. They both fell onto the bed, their clothes disheveled. Nolan bit her lip and said in a low voice, "Z, you started this." Her rare initiative was a catalyst to him, making him lose control. She belonged to him. She could only belong to him in her lifetime. He seemed to have said something into her ear, but she was fast asleep. Nolan hugged her and fell asleep with her in his arms. The next day, Maisie packed her backpack and was ready to go. The bag contained daily essentials, clothes, and nothing else. Nolan went downstairs and saw that she had her hair up in a high ponytail, with no makeup and in hiking gear. She didn't have her usual glamour, but it was a new look, pretty and cool. Quincy parked the car in the driveway while Nolan walked Maisie out. She walked toward the car, and Nolan put out his arm to hug her waist, got close to her ear, and said, "Look for Sherry if you get into trouble in there." Maisie paused, turned to look at him, but got into the car without saying a word. Right after the car drove away, Nolan remembered something and picked up his phone to call Rowena. "Has the ring we got from the jade store been delivered to Black Gold?" After winning the auction the other day, he had gotten Rowena to take over the arrangement and set the address to Black Gold Group. He intended to give the present to Z when she returned, but he couldn't wait. He had to find time to visit the troops in a few days to surprise Z. Rowena said, "The ring hasn't been delivered yet, but don't worry. The people from the jade store said that they'll arrange for the delivery in 2 days." Nolan frowned. "Get them to do it sooner." After their conversation, Rowena looked at the custom-made gift box from the jade store in her hand, her eyes cold. An intimidating black Patton slowly drove toward the Swallow district. The huge Swallow County training camp was hidden deep in the woods. Since it was closed to outsiders, friends and family didn't usually get to go in. Maisie looked out of the window, seeming to be thinking about something. Titus had told her something about the Goldmans, and she knew that they weren't a simple family. Chapter 260. How was this huge closed training camp in Swallow County related to the Goldmans? The camp gate slowly opened, and the Patton drove through. Quincy and Maisie got out of the car. The troops could be seen in the field. A well-built man walked over to Sherry, who was in a cool uniform, with her short hair and a beret. She looked like a pretty boy. "Maisie." Sherry was excited to see Maisie and ran toward her. "Why are you here?" Quincy cleared his throat and said, "Ms. Vanderbilt is here to train." Sherry was stunned and said in a curious tone, "Has Mr. Goldman lost his marbles?" Letting her come to a place like this, it's Elder Master Goldman's idea. Quincy helplessly cut her off. Sherry opened her mouth, but didn't say anything. It was Elder Master Goldman's idea. He's too tough on her. She's so delicate. Can she get through with this? By the way, Maisie, she pulled the man next to her over and introduced, "This is Quincy's and my brother, Hans." That was the first time Hans met Maisie. He had heard a lot about Nolan having a wife from Sherry, so he immediately knew who she was. He scratched his head and smiled. "Hello, Ms. Vanderbilt." Maisie said, "Don't need to call me that. I'm just a newbie here, and I'll be training with you for half a month." Sherry couldn't guarantee that she could last half a month. After all, a few girls who joined couldn't handle it and wanted to go home. "But our training is really tough." Maisie didn't hesitate. "It's all right, I'll pull through." Sherry started admiring her. She was indeed Nolan's bride. "MSZ. Let me show you around this place." "Thanks." Maisie smiled. After they were some distance away, Hans asked Quincy, "Quince, what's wrong with Elder Master Goldman? Sending her here? She looks like a delicate woman. Is this going to be all right?" "We can't do anything about it since Elder Master Goldman said that no one can help her, not even you." He will only accept her if she performs well during this half a month. Hans nodded. It was a test. On the other side, Sherry brought Maisie to the women's quarters. Since Sherry's rank was higher than most, the female cadets would salute her. Sherry brought her to a shared room. Each room was for 2 people, and the rooms were equipped with air conditioning and necessary appliances. The blankets were folded into squares, and there were 2 sets of training uniforms on the other bed. Sherry, what brings you here? A girl in pigtails who came back with water almost spilled it when she saw Sherry. Sherry asked her to come forward. Come here. She's your bunkmate from now on. She then introduced Maisie. This is Raven Dixon. She's a newbie who joined 3 months ago. The youngest here. Raven put out her hand. Hello. I'm Raven. They call me Rai. You can call me that as well. Maisie shook her hand. Just call me Maisie. You two get to know each other. If you need any help, just ask Raven or come to me. Sherry patted her chest enthusiastically, happy to be of service.